In the early days of the Pacific War, the skies above the South Pacific were dominated by the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, a fighter aircraft that had earned a reputation as one of the deadliest in the world. Introduced by the Imperial Japanese Navy in 1940, the Zero was light, fast, and extraordinarily maneuverable. It could outearn and outfly most Allied aircraft, and its pilots were trained in aerial combat from the moment they joined the service. The Zero quickly became the symbol of Japan's dominance in the air, striking fear into the hearts of American and Allied pilots. At the start of World War II, American pilots struggled to match the speed and agility of the Japanese Zero. Its impressive range allowed it to strike targets across vast distances, while its lightweight design and powerful engine gave it an edge in dogfights. The Zero's ability to outmaneuver American aircraft like the F4U Wildcat meant that early battles in the Pacific were marked by heavy losses for the Allies. In the Battle of Midway, for instance, Japanese pilots flying the Zero claimed the majority of the kills, leaving American pilots scrambling for a solution. The impact of the Zero on the early Pacific campaigns was profound. Allied air forces, particularly the U.S. Navy, found themselves in a difficult position. Though American fighters like the Wildcat were capable of taking down Japanese aircraft, they were no match for the Zeros in terms of maneuverability and speed. As a result, the Allies suffered heavy losses in the early years of the war. Enter the F4U Corsair, an aircraft that would eventually change the course of the Pacific War. At first glance, the Corsair was unlike any other fighter in the skies. Developed by Vought in 1940, the F4U was a product of innovation and necessity. The United States needed a faster, more powerful aircraft to challenge the dominance of the Japanese Zero. Yet, the Corsair wasn't an immediate favorite among Navy personnel. Its design, though revolutionary, had some significant drawbacks, particularly its challenging landing characteristics. The F4U Corsair was powered by a massive 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, giving it one of the most powerful engines of any fighter in World War II. Its distinctive gullwing design was a solution to the problem of fitting such a large engine into the plane while maintaining stability during takeoff and landing. This wing design, along with a robust fuselage and powerful armament, made the Corsair a formidable opponent in the air. It was equipped with 6.50 caliber machine guns and could carry bombs or rockets for ground attack missions, further enhancing its versatility. However, early testing revealed that the aircraft had serious issues with landing, particularly when operated from aircraft carriers. The plane's high speed and heavy weight made it difficult for pilots to land safely, which led to the initial perception that the Corsair was not suitable for carrier duty. Instead, it was relegated to operating from land bases, where it was used for ground attack missions and long-range escort missions. Despite these challenges, the Corsair's performance in combat quickly began to change the minds of skeptics. By 1943, as American forces gained a foothold in the Pacific, the Navy began to deploy the Corsair in combat situations. Its effectiveness was evident from the outset, and soon it became a feared adversary for the Japanese pilots who had once held supremacy over the skies. It was clear that the tables were beginning to turn, but the real test would come when the Corsair faced off against the Zero in the heat of battle. In February 1943, the F4U Corsair's first real test in combat would come over the rugged hills and dense jungles of Guadalcanal, a pivotal location in the Solomon Islands, which had been the site of intense fighting between Allied and Japanese forces. Guadalcanal was a strategic prize, and control of the island was critical to the Allied plan to cut off Japanese supply lines and eventually push them back across the Pacific. It was here, during the battle for the island, that the Corsair would prove its mettle for the first time. The pilots of VM F1-4, a Marine Corps fighter squadron, had been sent to Guadalcanal to provide air support for the ongoing ground campaign. These pilots, many of whom were seasoned veterans of previous engagements, now faced a new enemy in the form of the Japanese Zero. Although the Corsair was a powerful fighter, its pilots were still learning how to handle its unique flight characteristics, especially when it came to carrier landings and the Corsair's distinctive handling at slower speeds. But what they quickly discovered was that, in terms of firepower, speed, and sheer toughness, the Corsair was a significant step up from the earlier American fighters like the Wildcat. The first engagement over Guadalcanal was intense. As the Zeros swooped in, the Corsairs responded with a barrage of gunfire, quickly revealing their firepower advantage. The powerful .50 caliber machine guns mounted on the Corsair shredded through the lightweight frames of the Zeros, and the Corsair's superior speed meant that it could outrun many of the Japanese fighters when needed. Although the American pilots were still adjusting to the handling characteristics of the Corsair, it became clear that this aircraft was a game-changer. The pilots had the firepower to take on the Zeros head-to-head, and the more they flew the Corsair, the better they understood how to maximize its potential. The first combat missions made it apparent that the tide of aerial combat was beginning to shift. With the Corsair in the air, the Allies now had a fighter that could go toe-to-toe with the best Japan had to offer, and the results of these early encounters would set the stage for future battles. As the pilots of F4U continued to hone their tactics and push the limits of their new aircraft, they became more adept at using the Corsair's strengths to their advantage. It wasn't just a new plane, it was a new way of fighting in the skies, a strategy built on firepower, speed, and the courage to face the Zero head-on. The battle over Guadalcanal would mark the first of many encounters where the Corsair would establish its dominance over the Japanese fighters, but it was only the beginning of what would soon become a decisive advantage for the Allies. As the battle for Guadalcanal raged on, the Corsair's reputation began to solidify. The American pilots, initially hesitant about the new aircraft's handling and landing quirks, were now becoming adept at using its firepower, speed, and resilience to dominate the skies over the Solomon Islands. With each mission, the Corsair pilots were learning more about their aircraft's strengths and how to best exploit them against the formidable Japanese Zero. One of the defining moments in this evolving aerial conflict came on the morning of June 19, 1943, when Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh of F4U achieved a feat that would go down in history. On this day, Walsh, already an experienced combat pilot, engaged in a dogfight with a squadron of Japanese Zeros. With his Corsair, Walsh was able to outmaneuver and outgun his adversaries, scoring a kill against one of the Japanese aircraft. This victory was not just a personal achievement for Walsh, it was a turning point in the broader aerial struggle in the Pacific. Walsh's success in bringing down the Zero was not an isolated incident. As the Corsair squadrons continued to operate over Guadalcanal, the tide of battle began to turn in favor of the Allies. The Zero, once a symbol of Japanese aerial superiority, was now facing an opponent that could match it in nearly every category. The Corsair's superior speed meant it could engage and disengage at will, leaving the Zeros in its wake. Its powerful armament, including 6.50 caliber machine guns, allowed it to fire devastating bursts of lead at any enemy in its sights. But perhaps most importantly, the Corsair's resilience in the face of damage began to set it apart. Unlike the delicate and often fragile Zero, the Corsair could absorb a great deal of punishment and still return to base. This toughness became critical in the battles that followed, where pilots were often forced to fly through heavy anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighter escorts. The Corsair's rugged build allowed it to withstand these challenges and continue flying, unlike its adversaries, who would often be forced to make emergency landings or be shot down by the relentless American gunners. As American pilots gained more confidence in their aircraft, the Zeros were forced to adapt. No longer could they claim uncontested superiority in the skies. With each dogfight, the Corsair's strengths were becoming undeniable, and the Japanese air forces began to feel the effects of this newfound challenge. In the skies over Guadalcanal, the Zero was no longer the undisputed master. The American pilots, armed with the F4U Corsair, were now turning the tables. The Corsair's success over Guadalcanal and other key Pacific battlefronts marked the beginning of the end for the Japanese Zero's dominance. As the months passed and more Corsairs entered combat, it became clear that the balance of power in the Pacific had shifted. The Zero, once considered the best fighter aircraft in the world, was now being hunted by the more advanced and heavily armed American Corsairs. The impact of the Corsair's victory in the Pacific was far-reaching. The aircraft not only helped secure air superiority in the region, but also contributed to the overall success of Allied campaigns in the Pacific. With the Zero no longer able to dominate the skies, the Japanese forces found themselves at a significant disadvantage. The Corsair had proven itself to be one of the most effective combat aircraft of World War II, and its role in shifting the tide of war in the Pacific could not be overstated. As the war progressed, the F4U Corsair would continue to play a pivotal role in many of the major naval battles of the Pacific, including the Battle of the Philippine Sea and the Battle of Iwo Jima. With each mission, the Corsair's reputation grew, and its impact on the outcome of the war became undeniable. By the time Japan finally surrendered in 1945, the Corsair had earned its place as one of the most iconic and effective fighter planes in history. The fall of the Zero and the rise of the Corsair was not just a story of technological superiority. It was a story of adaptability, innovation, and the courage of the pilots who flew these aircraft into battle. The Corsair's victory in the Pacific marked the end of an era and the dawn of a new age of air combat, one in which the United States would dominate the skies.